We want to thank each one for coming. Who would have ever thought we'd be wearing masks in the United States of America if we wasn't holding somebody up? But that's what it's come to. We are so grateful that Paula is able to be here this morning. We're grateful that all of you are here this morning. And when we conclude our service, we're going to have the processional come around to the front and go down this side so that you can just give your condolences to Paula that's in the back, and that way it'll be great for her to see each and every one. Richie Olin Davis, also known as Pops. Born January the 1st, 1949 in Pratt to Olin, Dutch, and Margaret Helena Conkle Davis. Passed away November the 17th, 2020 in Pratt. On March the 4th, 1972, Richie married Paula Adele Tuttle, who has been the love of his life for all those years since 1972. To this union are two sons, Travis Eugene Davis of Pratt and Waco Dean Davis of Hutchinson. Richard is survived by his wife, Paula of Cunningham, his sons, Dr. Davis and Waco, his brother, Kent Dale and Tammy McNutt of Hutchinson, and his sisters, Denise, Eddie Guzman of Topeka, and Rhonda and Glenn Monahan of Haviland. Richard was preceded in death by his parents and by a sister, Renee Davis, who passed away at birth. Richie was a board member of the Haviland Heritage Foundation and has served on several boards in the Greensburg area during his lifetime. And the family has suggested memorials to the Hilltop Manor Nursing Center in Cunningham and to the Richard Davis Fund with the Haviland Heritage Foundation or the SRCA drag strip. There's a few people here that know what that is all about. And at this time, they're going to play a song.
Well, you guys can relax. This is the only time that we're going to be in the presence of Richie in our lifetime where you're not going to have to worry about trying to buy a better life insurance policy or the right Chevy that'll work perfect for you. When I decided to speak, I wasn't sure if I'd make it through it without breaking up a bit, and I might, but realize that it only hurts because we care so much when we lose people like Dad. I also take comfort in the fact that I come from one of the strongest, my brother and I come from one of the strongest couples that I've ever met. It also doesn't hurt that Dad's mother, Margaret, was a custodian in this very church for over 30 years. So we're in a very good place to celebrate Richie's life. The grieving process finds you awake a lot, alone with your thoughts, playing back your life and searching for every precious moment, hoping you can remember every single thread of what is important to you. I believe if you're here celebrating today with us, then most of you understand what it meant when my father came to me when I was a second grader and said, whatever the problem is, handle it, or I will come to the school and handle it for you. I said, okay, Dad. Anyone here successful with hanging up with Dad on the first goodbye? Wasn't either. Here's how it kind of went for me. Hey, Pops, yeah, how we doing? Conversation, long conversation. Okay, well, good enough. Okay, I'll catch you later. Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, well, I'm gonna get going. All right, okay, yeah. Well, actually, yeah, I'm working on that today. Yes. Okay, have a good one. Yeah. No, I think it's supposed to rain tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah, he did. Travis did say he was busy. Okay, Pops, gotta go. Okay. Well, I can make you pizza, or we can do chicken and rice. So, okay, I'll decide. I got you. Okay, later, Pops. Yeah, Mama sounded good today. She really did. Okay, bye, Pops. Gotta go. Okay, love you. Bye. I always joked with him when I was younger. Every time I was on the phone with him, it felt like I was in a Mutual of Omaha ad, because it just all the years of being an insurance agent, I guess. But you notice that in every single conversation that he managed to get Mom and Travis and me into it. And of course, the occasional, yeah, that 283 at Kent-Nova went 13 flat down the track every single time. By the way, that's the cleanest that's ever been said. Mom and Dad and I rode out the tornado at a neighbor's house in the basement. Huddled together over my mom and all of the turmoil around us, I could feel my dad's hand. And then I began to hear prayer. And I wasn't processing it fast enough, so later I asked him, what were you praying? And he recalled every word in detail. And then he said, I spoke to the storm, because that's what you do. So he was always wanting to go to Sonic at happy hour and get us drinks. When he first moved up to his house up in Hutchinson, he'd ask a couple times, come in the shop, so you want something to drink? It's happy hour. I said, yeah, that's fine. And he would go get it unless he thought that I needed to cruise with him. And then we would go together. And I'd forgotten that in Greensburg, Mom would bring us drinks to the shop from Rexall's made by Richard Huckreedy. And that Mom and Dad drove all the way out to Rolla one summer where Travis and I were roofing, don't ask me why, to hand deliver fountain drinks in a cooler to each of us. later realizing they just wanted to deliver a small taste of home to us. So back to Sonic. I was wanting to make sure that he was eating better, so thankfully Mom taught Travis and I how to cook growing up. So I was trying to use that to try to help control his diet. And I think the word control and my dad have never been in the same as far as us being able to. So we were cruising in the Elk one day to Sonic to get a drink, and I just happened to be driving that day. And we pull up to order the drink, and I look at him, and I'm looking around the El Camino, and I kind of just playfully look over and say, there's an awful lot of napkins in here. I was like, you've been frequenting the greasy burger joints quite a bit? And he just immediately looked at me and said, no, not any more than I usually do. I was like, okay, I'll just check it. So then we pull up, and the lady hands us the drinks, and I notice her kind of look past me, and she looks over at Dad, and she goes, Rich? And I look over at Dad, and he just, well, I was here before. She liked the El Camino. I was like, all right, Pops. Through everything that life dealt, he never stopped moving forward. He never stopped being a husband, a caregiver, a provider, a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. My brother got a 48, and I got a 44-year degree on how to be a man. Every one of us carries a load, so as I downshift through the path of my destination, when I get there, 3 things will still be on my trailer. Divine order. Thank you for what you've given me, what you're giving me, and what you're going to give. And the best that we can hope for in this life is to help each other through this life. We call him Richard, we called him Richie, but Travis and I got to call him Dad. In the language that only our drag race family is going to understand, Dad, you ran your race, you cut a light, you ran the number, you hung a bag of donuts on them, you put them on the trailer, and you got to take your Wally home. Thank you.
Did you all notice in one of those pictures that there was a car, and in the front of the car was a chainsaw? And I thought, did he work on his cars with chainsaws? No. Now, I need you to look in your notes that you took back to the pew and see if my notes are in there, okay? Now, while he's doing that, and I would like for you all to, especially Travis and Waco, I want you all to stand and to face the audience. And if you are in the audience that raced or dealt with cars or that kind of thing, would you all stand up so they can recognize you, please? Because I know there's quite a few of you. Yeah, good. And it's one of those things, and maybe Travis and Waco know the automobiles and that kind of thing, but that's what you get to talk about from now on, okay? Because Richard's going to be in your mind and your memory from now on. Thank you. You may be seated. Appreciate it. And as Waco was talking, one of the things that just entered my mind was from the standpoint of how he directed you boys from the time you were born till now. 20 years from now, you're still going to talk about, well, Dad would not allow us to do that, so we're not going to do it. I mean, really, that's the way it goes with us, okay? Now, I want to start about his life, so I'm just going to pause for about 5 seconds. And here's the way I want to start. Happy New Year! He was born on January 1st, back in a good year of 1949. But can you imagine? I think we're going to the hospital today. We're going to have a son, and this son is going to be the eldest of our family and so forth. So not only was he to you boys and to Paula as his wife, but at the same time, his dad passed away when he was 12. And so he also had to become a man early in an essence. And then he's continued that through the years. But born in Pratt, raised in Haviland, and worked a lot of his life in Greensburg. And he went to school here in grade school in Haviland and high school where he played football for his sport. And then they said he played the violin in the band. Can you imagine back in 1960s, somewhere in there, graduating in 67, do y'all still have orchestra here and in the band? That was just interesting to me because you think of the band without violins, you think of orchestra with them, but that was what he did. And I bet he was good at it because he liked to be diligent and good in everything that he did. After high school, he went to Pratt Community College, and then he transferred to Fort Hays State College, which is now Fort Hays State University, and where he was going to major in engineering. But he didn't like all the math that was going to come with the engineering, and he got more interested in a certain lady during that timeline, and by the name of Paula Tuttle. Then he was ready to change his major from being an engineer to becoming Mr. Richard Davis and making her Mrs. Davis. Now, I like this part of his life because he really fell in love with Paula, and she fell in love with his car. And you still love that 57 Chevrolet, don't you? You remember that, don't you, Paula? But did I say that? His car was the 57 Chevrolet, and Paula would describe the car a lot better than she knew how to describe him. But to Richard, whatever it took to get her to become Mrs. Davis. Richie has always had an interest in cars and working on cars and fixing cars and buying cars and driving cars. And on March the 4th, 1972, Richard married Paula, and his life changed some. But his wife was also a car encourager, so he became more involved with cars because that's what it took to get her and make her happy, although she loved him. But she was the reinforcement from the start. And then Richard's life was to be the best husband, to be the best father, to be the best friend, to be the best guy that he could be. Richie became an insurance agent, selling Farm Bureau insurance that he did for a little over 25 years. Then he went out on his own with the Davis Independent Insurance for a few years, and following insurance, Richie drove a truck for Plains Marketing, hauling oil. Then he also sold cars and trucks for Doug Ray, and Doug and his wife are here today, and I think they're a part of that racing group, you know. Well, I learned something yesterday, and man, life now makes me compelled. Do I always have to buy my vehicles from Doug Ray? No, I have a pretty good history of that. But you know what they told me yesterday, Doug? Because when I go in, and especially if I'm going to buy a used vehicle, I want one that has not been smoked in. And evidently, Richie heard me saying that to somebody, and every time they would get a pickup in, they would take it down to Dr. Davis and said, go smell the interior of that vehicle, because of his allergies. He would know that it was smoked in or not. And there was one or two that didn't pass the test. See? Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate it. Well, Richie also loved to go antiquing with Paula. She loved antiquing, and he loved antiquing. I hope you liked his suspenders, Paula. Did you like his suspenders? Of course, because he drove better when he had those suspenders on, didn't he? And he worked hard at taking care of his wife. And most of you know, but Paula's had MS for a little over 40 years. She still has a smile, and she's always been a go-getter and always doing the best she can. And we appreciate Cunningham taking care of her and also of bringing her today. And like she was saying a while ago, she's the queen today. And I think she's always been the queen. Yes. And whatever she said, Richie said, yes, ma'am. There you go. And that's good. He worked hard at taking care of her, and with Paula having a lot of energy, and down through time before all this set in, people would ask Richie, he says, how do you keep up with her with all the energy? And he said, I don't. I just stay out of her way, but when it comes supper time, I make sure I'm there on time. And that works good. That works good. Did I mention that Paula loved his 57 Chevrolet? They loved chasing the sons all over the place, especially Travis when he was running in track and that kind of thing, and then Waco with his cars and rebuilding and that kind of thing. But they would chase, and then I guess Richie evidently was a photographer, because he would film a lot of those events and that kind of thing. Richard and the boys enjoyed doing road trips, and that was after Paula was not able to go. And in one day, and they've done this twice, but they would do the 4-day trips to Tulsa, and then to Topeka, and then to Oklahoma City, and then to Great Bend, and then back to the starting line. But they had it was a race, and 1,250 miles plus racing in each of those towns in a 4-day trip. And the last time they did this was September of 2020. When they got done, Richie was tired, but he needed to be, and he was great just to be with them. Over the years, Richie has had over 30 cool cars. And what might be cool to you and I may not be cool to him, but to him, they were cool cars. He enjoyed them. One of his cars was the El Camino, which is sitting out front of the building this morning. And I had the privilege of selling him that car. And that was neat. And as he said, that car, if it ever came up for sale, he was going to buy it, because he knew Roy Fincham, who put that car together, and Roy Fincham could always beat him in a race. And so he wanted that car, and he got it. That was neat. But that particular day, we sold that car, plus we sold another car, and the lady who lost her husband, she was from Haviland as well, but we also sold a 57 Chevrolet that day. Richie loved to race. In case you all didn't know it, his favorite racetrack was the highway that goes north out of town. Now, show of hands, how many of you all here this morning have raced on the highway north of town? Go ahead and hold up your hand. Now we're going. Truth's coming out. He's not the only one. You just told John Bertram to stay put and that kind of thing and not come those times. But and if he would have seen them, he probably would have just shaken his head and said, yeah, it's Richard, he's fine. I could tell a story about that, but I won't. The family enjoyed going on these trips, and even Paula, when she could, enjoyed the races and that kind of thing because she loved the 57 Chevrolet. But the family enjoyed vacation trips to Colorado Springs and then the trip to Pikes Peak. The boys were telling me about this yesterday. And Paula, do you remember that trip to Pikes Peak? You and Richie drove up to the top and waited for the boys because they were going to walk. And they walked. And they walked. And Waco got sicker than a dog. And Travis's allergies sat long on the trip, but finally they made it. Now, Richie and Paula were sitting in the car waiting for him to get there, and they had shut the car off, and when the boys got there and they was ready to go back down, the car would not start. And they had to call a wrecker to come get them. So, picture this one. Have you ever been to the top of Pikes Peak, and you know how narrow the roads, and the wrecker did not have room for 4 people in the cab of the truck. So when he loaded their car on the back of the truck, they had to ride in the car. Now, Mr. Adventure, Mr. Richie, thought this was pretty cool. Now, they didn't tell me about Paula. I have a feeling she was okay with it. The boys were frightened, but they made it down and they lived to tell it. Then there was a story of Richie as a little boy. And the family had, and I don't remember all of it, but was it a pet turkey or did they just have several turkeys around? And this one turkey was a mean turkey. And Richie knew it was mean and that kind of thing, and he was kind of scared of it anyway. And so one day, you don't listen to this, okay? All right. He got out his BB gun and he was in tune to shoot the turkey. And he did, but he didn't kill the turkey. And so it was, Richie, you better hide. And that he did. Richie was a helper on the farm, and there was the story of the fuel tank that had a small leak in it. They got out the arc welder and welded that leak. It's a wonder he lived to be his age. Can you imagine? Is there any of you here? There's even a professional welder in our midst. Would you patch a hole in a metal fuel tank with gas in it today with an arc welder? No, okay. Well, the Lord was looking out after him, but anyway, he welded it shut, okay? This is for you, young man. You're 14. When Richie was 12 or maybe a little younger, do you know what his transportation to school was? A tractor. Can you imagine driving a tractor to school there at Cheney and saying, showed up on my tractor today? Not many of us would want to do that. Anyway, but that was his transportation to school at times. Then Richie spent all of his adult years taking care of his wife and his sons, and Then in 2015, he had a bypass surgery of 4 bypasses. He also got an infection, so there was a time that Richard and Paula were in the same home together while he was rehabilitating. Now I've got to tell you a story about Richard calling me. This hasn't been too awful long ago. Now, whether it was a year or something, I don't know. But we have a gentleman in Pratt that walks the streets, and he walks the streets nearly daily. And he called me on the phone and he said, "John, I got a favor to ask." And I was telling the boys about this yesterday, but he said this young fellow will walk into Doug Ray and either get something to drink or just rest a while or have somebody to visit with, but said his shoes are just wore out. And he said, if you see him sometime, stop and ask if we can buy him a pair of shoes, because Richie was going to buy the pair of shoes, but he didn't want him to know that it was from Richard, okay? It wasn't 2 or 3 days later, why I happened to see the gentleman walking on the street, and I pulled over to the side and stopped him, and I said, "Are you in need of some new shoes? Because I have someone that is willing to buy you a pair of shoes, and if you can tell me where, what size, whatever we need to do, we can do it." And he said, "No, my shoes are good." And he started walking on. So I called Richard back and I said, "I tried, but he's not ready for another pair of shoes yet." So as I told the boys yesterday, if I see him in need of a pair of shoes, we're going to buy him a pair of shoes in honor of Richard. And because that was one of the things that he wanted. Then the story from 2019. Waco and Travis started working on a man cave in Hutchinson for Richie. Now there again, if you were involved, because it wasn't just Travis and Waco that did this, and it wasn't just Cassie and Cortland and Weston either, but if you were involved driving to Hutch and working on that man cave, would you hold your hand up, please? Looky there. Several. Good. All right. Well, they said they didn't do a whole lot to the outside of the house, but they did a lot to the inside of the house. And they were able to take Richard up and to present him a place to not only rehab, but a place to retire. Took a lot of family and friends and working daily for a year to get this ready, and it was 5 days ahead of the COVID that he was willing to move in. And I don't think he knew anything about it until the time, did he? So it was neat, and he loved it. He also fell in love with another girl. 2 girls. Is that okay, Paula? Okay. Because he fell in love with Cassie. He fell in love with Cortland. And we guys don't like that phrase, do we, when we're 14? But he really liked Weston too. Is that okay? But he loved you. Okay. And then it was a week ago yesterday that little Cortland had a severe problem. And as you can tell, she has a new hairdo. And she has a scar where they did some operating on her head, and she had a brain bleed. And she had surgery, and the doctors had to come and tell Mom and tell Brother and tell Travis that there's a chance she may not make it. But with the Lord's help and the way the doctor did his work, 5 days later, she walked out of ICU and she is here today. Always be grateful. That's a wonderful thing. And one of the things about this story was that Richie was concerned more about her than he was about his own situation. And it was on the 17th that Richard passed away, but it was also Chrissy's birthday. So you will remember his death on that day, and that's all right. That makes it special. Did a funeral one time for another gentleman that lived in Haviland for a while, and he passed away on Christmas Day. And everybody said, "Oh, that's too bad that you passed away on Christmas Day." And his wife said, "No, that's a great day. It's a great day." So you can appreciate that because of love and because of concern. We're all glad, Cortland, for the outcome, and we just pray that you continue to get better. Okay? At this time, they're going to play another song, and then we're going to look at some scripture, then we'll be done. in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3. And you have these verses, or some of these verses, in your program. It says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart. For they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and prosperity." And before we read on, I want to just talk a little bit about the purpose of the Old Testament, and especially these books of poetry that we have. Because with the books of poetry, you have Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. And you also have the book of Job, that why we classify that primarily as poetry, but we do. And we think of the wisdom that comes from these passages. Because we remember one of the things about Solomon, and Solomon prayed for wisdom, and one of the things that God gave him was wisdom. And the scriptures even teach us that Solomon was probably the wisest man, at least at that point, but Solomon's wisdom also took him down. And you think about, "My son, do not forget my teaching." And whether it was Moses or whether it was Solomon or whether it was different ones in writing the scripture for the Old Testament for the Lord, one of the things that they were told by the Lord was, write them down. Put them on your forehead, put them on the doorpost, put them on your hands, do whatever you can, and keep repeating them so you'll know what the teaching is. Travis and Waco, did your mother and dad ever have to tell you more than once something that they would like for you to do? Maybe, yeah, See, and all of us are that way, aren't we? And it's like, well, why do we go over those scriptures over and over and over again, and so that they're embedded? That's why I said a while ago, 20 years from now, you're still going to say things that your mom taught you and that your dad taught you. Because one of the things that we learned from the children of Israel while they were 40 years wandering in the wilderness, what happened? They would forget sometimes what the teaching of the Lord was. They kept thinking that Moses was the one that was taking care of them all the time when it was God and it was the Lord that was providing them, because their shoes didn't wear out, their clothes didn't wear out, they had food, they had water. And every now and then the Lord would let them get thirsty so that they would understand. Today, God takes care of us today. It's not just the stock market, and it's not just this and that, what we can do. It's still God that provides for us today. Then in verse 2 of Proverbs 3, "For they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and bring you prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you, and bind them around your neck." That was the other thing. Put them on a piece of paper and bind them around your neck and write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. Now, from the standpoint, and I know, being a preacher, I have a lot of things memorized, but how many verses do you and I have that are memorized that really have some meaning? Because these are the verses the boys wanted. Most everybody here can probably quote John 3:16. Can everybody here quote Genesis 1:1? And if you can do that, can you quote John 1:1, the Gospel of John? Because in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, but John 1:1's another easy one. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus was with him all the time. Verse 3, let love and faithfulness never leave you. Verse 4, then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. How important is your name? If I know Dr. Davis and I know that he's a chiropractor, and am I dare going to let him work on my back? If he's got a good name, you're going to allow him to work on your back, aren't you? Waco Davis, well, I know he works on cars. Am I going to let him work on my car? That's why you're busy, isn't it? Because you have a name that says you'll take care of that car. And all of us. Am I going to do business with Doug Ray Chevrolet? Or are people going to do business with Ham Auction and Real Estate? How important is your name and mine? It really becomes important, doesn't it? And it was important back in the beginning when the scriptures were written. You will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. That was one of my mother's favorite verses. Trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord more than you trust in Chevrolet. Does that make sense? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. One of the things that God told his people back in the Old Testament, and it comes out in the book of Deuteronomy, and a great command, and he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. In the New Testament, in Matthew chapter 22 and around verse 37, 38, people ask Jesus, what's the first and great command? Can all of you quote that? Because it's the same thing, isn't it? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. Then he adds one, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Wow. That's what makes Dad pretty important, because he might like to sell insurance and he might like to race cars, but he treated everybody the way they needed to be treated. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Verses that aren't there, but chapter 4 and verse 1, listen, my son, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. And one of my favorite verses in the Bible comes from Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7. Wisdom is supreme. Therefore, get wisdom. Though it costs you all you have, get understanding. So we might be the smartest people and that kind of thing and the wisest people, but if we don't understand, what do we have? You think about that. Oh, when you was showing the mechanic room and the cars torn apart and that kind of thing, and you lost me because I am not a mechanic. But at the same time, that was what was going through my mind. You boys, your dad, other men that are here, maybe some of the ladies that they know about automobiles, and I can change a spark plug, but that's about it. But you better understand what makes that car tick. We need to understand what makes us tick and what makes our hearts tick. And I'm talking spiritually, not just a physical heart. Because it's like we can go to the doctor and they can do the bypasses. But what makes a heart love? What makes a heart be kind? And what makes a heart love your neighbor as you love yourself? Wisdom is supreme. Get wisdom, and though it costs you all you have, get understanding. All of us know that in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there's parables. And people ask Jesus, why do you teach in parables? And he said, because some people hear, but they don't hear. and they see, but they don't see. And he says, I do an earthly or a heavenly story with an earthly story with a heavenly meaning so that people will understand. All I know is when you put those cars back together and they run, that's when I get in. Until then. But how much understanding do we not have? But that's why it's important to assemble together and allow the preacher or allow the Bible teachers and to allow others to help us with our understanding. If I can tell you something about the Old Testament that's so important, why the Old Testament? So that we would understand Jesus Christ. So that we would understand Jesus. Because it took all that, and then what did people do? They crucified him because they did not understand or believe that he was the Christ. One more verse. Still in Proverbs, chapter 7 and verse 1. My son, keep my words and store up my commands within you. Keep my commands and you will live. Store them up. Just like you've stored up stories from your racing, your working together, your running, your pikes peaking, and all those kind of things, you will have them as we all have our stories as well. 2 more verses and then we will have a prayer and be done. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. Probably everybody can quote it, but it's talking about faith. King James translation, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Then you go down 5 verses to verse 6. But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Do you love God? Do you love Jesus Christ? Do you love Richie? And guess what? I think in the long run, Paula loved Richie more than she did the 57 Chevrolet. Jesus tells us, if you love me, you'll keep my commands. And if you love me, you'll deny yourself and you'll take up your cross and follow me. If Mr. Richard could come back and talk to us today, I'm certain that he would say, get to know Jesus Christ, because this is real. He would say that. That's passed on prior to us. If they could say, they would come back and say, Jesus Christ is real. God is real. Heaven is real. We need it. Let's bow together in prayer. Our God and Father in heaven, just thank you for being our God, and thank you for Jesus. But thank you for the life of Richard Davis. And we ask that you be with Paula. We ask that you continue to be with the home there at Cunningham that takes care of her, and as they take care of others, and they do a good job, and thank you for that. We ask that you continue to be with Travis, be with Waco, be with his brother and sisters, their families, with Chrissy and her children. Be with each and every one of us here. Help us to realize how important it is to do your will. Help us to apologize, but just help us to live for you. We're thankful for this time that we have been able to think about the life of Mr. Richard Davis, but help all of us to understand that at some point in time, this day will be for us. Thank you for Christ and the whole purpose of the cross. And without the shedding of blood, there was no forgiveness. So thank you for Jesus. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. At this time, they're going to lead the family around, and everybody will need to come down to the front and follow them and so forth. But prior to that, there's going to be a short video.
Enjoy your ride home. Hey, Pops. See ya. Leaving to go home from drag week.